happy to have you along today for what I know will be some valuable time spent for either you or someone in your life that you know and love, as we talk about protecting your emotional and psychological health and what we can all do to prevent conditions like anxiety and depression developing in the first place, which I think is a really exciting concept. So while today's discussion will have a focus on the perinatal stage, the principles shared can be applied to everyone. So considering our current statistics are that 1 in 2 people will experience some sort of mental illness in their lifetime, this is a discussion that's important to all of us, no matter what stage of life you're in. So I'm Rebecca McQueen from Bestmans Australia, and I welcome Dr. Stephen Carbone to join us, a medical professional who holds a passion for the promotion of mental wellbeing and the prevention of mental health conditions. Hi, Steve.
G'day, Rebecca. How are you?
I'm really good. Thanks so much for joining us.
No problems.
Let me share a little bit about who you are and what you do with the people who are out there listening today. So, Steve, you're the founder and executive director of Prevention United, a not-for-profit organisation based here in Melbourne, Australia. So Stephen has extensive clinical experience in mental health, having worked as a medical officer in the Victorian specialist mental health service system and as a general practitioner for many years before moving into public health practice in mental health. He's held various senior policy and research roles in the Victorian Government Department of Health and Human Services, Orygen Youth Health, and headspace, VicHealth and Beyond Blue. He's passionate about working with individuals, organisations and communities to help people experience their best possible mental health. Does that sound about right to you, Steve?
Yeah, it sounds good. You made it sound better than it really is, but yeah, thanks, Rebecca. It sounds good.
Good. Well, look, today I'm really excited from both a personal and a professional perspective to hear what you've got to share with us. So I'm going to get right into it today, knowing that there's people out there maybe on their lunch break. Let's get into our discussion. I've got a question, and that first question I've got is, we hear the term mental health used to talk about conditions like depression, but is mental health different from mental illness?
Look, it is, yeah. I think we've tended to use the term mental health as all encompassing, but really we need to start breaking it down and realise that there is what you might call good mental health and then mental ill health or mental health conditions, mental illnesses like depression and anxiety. And in fact, our mental health varies along a continuum where at sort of one end, the positive end of the continuum, we might call that mental well-being. And then at the other end of the continuum, the mental ill health end, that's where we might be experiencing something like a severe mental health condition, like a depression, anxiety condition or whatever. So yeah, it's better I like to talk about mental well-being when I'm referring to positive or good mental health, and mental health conditions when I'm talking about depression or anxiety.
Yeah, just to split the two. Well, with good mental health, how would you define that?
Yeah, so look, I think it's generally, you know, and in its most simple way, about feeling good emotionally most of the time and functioning well, both psychologically or personally and socially, that is in your interactions with others. And when I say feeling good, it doesn't mean that, look, you know, none of us can feel happy 24/7, you know, for 365 days a year. I mean, having some sort of negative feelings like sadness or worry or irritability or frustration, I mean, that's a normal part of life. So, but on balance, I guess when we've got high mental well-being, we're mostly feeling that sort of happiness and life satisfaction, and that we're also able to either sit with or regulate or deal with our negative emotions effectively. They don't overwhelm us. They don't challenge us too much. But it's also our day-to-day functioning. You know, we can be creative, productive, get things done, and we've got great relationships with others. We sort of feel connected with others. We feel part of our community. And we also have a sense of purpose or direction in life. So that's how I would frame sort of good mental health or high mental well-being. And then the contrast with mental health conditions is where those things are absent. So in an emotional sense, you're often feeling some sort of, you know, more intense or prolonged worry or sadness or anger. You know, your functioning drops off. You can't get the things that you need to do done in a day. You know, you often start to relate differently to others, and there may be social withdrawal, or, you know, spending less time with others, or getting into arguments. But there are other changes to your thought patterns, changes to you physically. You may experience, you know, tiredness, changes in your sleep, changes in your appetite. So as you can see, the sort of the good mental health is when things are going well and there's that vitality, and mental ill health is that almost like that a handbrake's been put on and you're not able to feel the way that you'd like to feel, or act or function in the way that you'd like to act. So that's the sort of distinction.
I like that you've put it into those words and those frameworks, because I think that when you're feeling mentally well, you know it, but often you don't sit down and define exactly what that is. And also when you're feeling not so good, you also know it, but it's good to have the language just to put around it, so you can, at least in your own mind, go, well, that's good, that's bad, where am I sitting?
Exactly right, because, you know, the important thing to realize is that our mental health is dynamic. It's not static. It's not fixed in one position on that continuum all the time. You know, there are going to be times when we're feeling, you know, really good, and other times when we might feel stressed and we're struggling, or even starting to experience depression. And so it's very important that you sort of try to reflect on, where am I on this continuum, and how do I get myself to the best end, you know, the positive or flourishing or high end of the mental health continuum.
Yes, and in the year that has been, I think it's never been more important that we have an awareness of that, and a consciousness of where we're sitting on that continuum, which I love that concept too. You're not either in good or bad, you could be somewhere on that continuum. Is really empowering information for people to know.
That's right. And the other thing is that, you know, not only, does it vary along a continuum, but there's a certain level of control over that. There are some things, it's not entirely within our control. You know, there are events or experiences or things that happen to our life, you know, that come at us and we have to deal with. But, you know, the mental health continuum concept also shows you how you can take some steps yourself every day to try to keep yourself in that positive frame of mind, that good mental health end of the continuum. But yeah, we can talk about that in a moment.
Yeah, what I'm interested to know is, I think we can all intuitively feel if we're in good or not so good mental health, but is there a way that it's measurable?
Yeah, look, there is. I mean, I think it comes back to the point, Rebecca, that you just made, that, you know, mental health is not one thing. It's sort of like a series of components or elements or ingredients that, you know, make up good mental health, as we've just sort of talked about. And nowadays, some clever people have developed checklists that you can use, you know, to sort of self-rate your level of mental good health or mental well-being. And, you know, there's some, like the mental health continuum, short form, long name, but basically it's a checklist that asks you those sort of questions. You know, how do you feel day to day? What are your relationships like with others? Do you feel you've got a sense of purpose or direction in life? Do you have self-belief and self-confidence? And, you know, the positive qualities that go towards making up good mental health. Just like when you're doing a checklist around you know, psychological distress or depression or anxiety, it asks you for a series of questions about, you know, your sleep and your appetite, your mood, you know, your thought patterns. So it's almost like there are, and I don't like to use this word, but, you know, for ease, there are symptoms of ill health, but there's also symptoms of good health. You know, what are the building blocks that, you know, we've said go towards good mental well-being? And there are checklists now that you can use online to rate yourself. And the key thing to remember, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky, is that, you know, they'll rate you into high, medium or low mental well-being, but low mental well-being isn't exactly the same as being mentally unwell. It's more like being in a rut or struggling or just not quite right. You'd have to go on to then use a specific you know, screening tool or checklist for depression to see whether you might also have a mental health condition like depression or anxiety. So there's two types of tools, the wellbeing tools and the depression, anxiety and other condition tools.
And is there somewhere that you could point us to that wellbeing tool that's online? Is it Beyond Blue or someone like that, have it on their website that we can go to and do a bit of a self-inventory?
Yeah, there's a couple of places. One is an organisation called the Wellbeing and Resilience Centre that's based in South Australia. And they've got an online checklist called the Be Well Tracker. And that allows you to, basically rate your mental well-being. And interestingly, it's also got the scales to assess whether you might have depression or anxiety. So it's a one-stop shop for measuring well-being and ill health. Beyond Blue mainly have the scales that relate to mental ill health. So they've got a tool called the K10, which is their mental illness checklist. And so you can go on to beyondblue.org.au and check that out. And we'll talk about this in a minute, but they've also got a tool specifically for new mums and dads to look out for postnatal depression as well.
Yeah, great. All right, well, those links too that you've mentioned, give me a couple of days, but I will pop them up on our handy contacts page so you can find them easily enough for anyone out there who's interested to maybe do a bit of a checklist. So tell me then, Steve, coming back to some of the things I'm wanting to cover today is, can we promote good mental health and prevent mental illness? And if so, how?
Yeah, and the short answer is yes, we can. Our mental health conditions like depression and anxiety, they're not inevitable. They're not just going to happen, and there's nothing we can do either personally or as a society to sort of prevent or do something about. So it is both possible to promote good mental health or mental well-being, and it is also possible to prevent or reduce the likelihood of, someone experiencing depression and anxiety. So it's basically this sort of balancing act between what we call protective factors and risk factors. So the things that sort of keep us well and buffer us against stress versus the things that cause us stress and test our resilience and put us at risk of mental health conditions. So the protective factors are things like, and we can talk about this, self-care skills, looking after your mental well-being, steps, actions you can take every day. Social supports. I mean, there's plenty of evidence to show that, people who have got a good, strong support network around them tend to experience better mental well-being, lower risk of depression and anxiety compared to people who experience loneliness or social isolation. Humans do well when they've got connections with other humans, safe, respectful relationships with other people are important for our mental well-being. And then, the other things are, really the basics, having access to sufficient income, work, stable housing, and then it's the environments around us, the home environment, if we're kids, what's happening at school, if we're working, what's happening at work, but also what's happening in the broader community, as we've seen with COVID-19, that counts. And on the flip side, there are what you would call risk factors, things that are more likely to impact your mental health and increase your risk of depression or anxiety. For children, it's things like child abuse and neglect, which is sadly, one of those things that does still happen in our community. Women who are exposed, or men and women who are exposed to family violence, bullying, racism, but just stressful things that happen to us, loss, relationship breakdown. There's a lot of stressful life events that can contribute to depression and anxiety. And then, as we said, financial problems, unemployment and housing problems. And with COVID-19, we've seen this big increase in stress levels because of those things. People have been socially isolated. They haven't had their support network around them. Many have either lost their jobs or had reduced hours. Some people's businesses, are struggling, in the face of the lockdown measures. So the stress levels in the community have increased for everyone, and putting some people very close to the point of experiencing depression or anxiety. So that's what I mean. There are things that we can do to look after ourselves, but we also need things to do things collectively as a community, as a society, you know, to look after everyone's best interests.
And those bigger things that you're talking about, as you said, they're huge social change. They're these social determinants of health that often we as individuals don't have a lot of control over. And to change our situation, if we've lost our job, and those types of big issues are difficult for us to do quickly. So are there things that we can do that are more, rather than a macro level, on a micro level, to help ourselves move along that continuum the right way?
Absolutely, Rebecca. And I think that's a good way to put it. I mean, I think we just have to look at what's in our control and, you know, work on that first. But, you know, as an organisation, Prevention United, one of our big, you know, actions is advocacy, where we're advocating for those social policies, those public government policies to be put in place, you know. But at a micro level, yeah, I think, you know, the key thing is around, you know, what I'm going to talk about is around, I call it self-care skills. So if we unpack that, I mean, self-care is, you know, the steps that we can take to look after our mental well-being, particularly in times of stress. Now, that's not self-indulgence. I mean, this is essential. This is looking after your mental health, just like when we've all been trained to look after our physical health. You know, we are allowed to, when we need to, you know, also start thinking about how do we look after our mental health. Now, fortunately, some of the things that look after our physical health will also improve our mental health. So, for example, healthy eating. There's a lot of information now that shows that the quality of our diet can have an influence on the way we feel. They call it mood and food. And so, you know, certain high quality diets that are rich in natural sort of fruit, veg, grains, cereals, and low in processed foods, you know, junk foods, sugary foods, they can actually change the dynamics of the bacteria in your gut, which then influences your immune system and that influences your brain. So a healthy diet leads to better mood. Physical activity, absolutely. Now, the science is really crystal clear. Regular physical activity is not just good for your heart and lungs and your waistline, it's good for your brain. You know, regular physical activity can, you know, prevent a substantial amount of depression. There was one study that said, you know, 30 minutes a day, 3 times a week, would drop the percentage of depression by about 12% in the community. You know, and it is particularly useful during the perinatal period. There's a lot of good studies showing that exercise, you know, during pregnancy can actually help to stave off antenatal, postnatal depression. So get moving, get active. That's really important. You know, sleep. We sometimes forget about sleep, you know, I think, you know, that's just something we have to do. But sleep, you know, is very restorative. It helps with, you know, both your physical and your psychological repair and recovery. So getting those, you know, 7, 8, 9 hours a night, you know, making sure that, you know, you get a healthy amount of sleep is also very helpful. That's the physical sort of lifestyle or changes, but there's others if you're happy for me to keep talking about those.
Yeah, love you too, love you too. And just as you're saying about sleep, one of the cruel things I think about anxiety and depression is often it's your sleep that drops off and it becomes that downward spiral when that happens.
Exactly right. And you know, a lack of sleep puts you at risk of depression and anxiety, but then those conditions cause it. And then you're absolutely right, you get into that, you know, vicious cycle. And there are strategies that people can learn, you know, whether or not they're depressed or not, to get a better night's sleep. And that can actually be a short circuit. It can actually, you know, nip it in the bud and actually help in recovery from depression as well as preventing depression. So, you know, there's stuff online that you can learn about good sleep hygiene that, you know, And it's particularly good for teenagers, by the way. You know, one of the reasons, you know, that some people theorize there's been a rise in teenage depression, you know, is because people aren't doing those three: the good quality diet, the regular physical activity, too much screen time, and not enough sleep, too much screen time. So, you know, those sort of three basic things that are part of our evolution, that what we need, you know, we're possibly not doing them properly. But there's also the more mental or psychological strategies that we can use. And a lot of these actually are strategies that have been developed actually to treat depression and anxiety. But if you learn them and use them, you can actually avert or stave off or, you know, avoid depression and anxiety. That's the beauty of these strategies. They work for anyone, whether they've got symptoms or not. So, you know, that's things like relaxation strategies, you know, learning how to calm your body and your mind, you know, deep breathing exercises, you know, muscle relaxation, yoga, Pilates, you know, being in nature, anything that sort of decreases the stress hormones in your system, including adrenaline and noradrenaline and cortisol. Problem solving, learning how to deal with issues in a sort of systematic way. Clear thinking, or what some people like to call a helpful mindset. We know that some people's thinking tricks them into feeling bad. You know, something happens, they take it the wrong way, they put the wrong spin on it. It starts to make them feel bad about themselves, or bad about their life situation, or bad about the future. But it's often not really, you know, that there is, you know, it's part of the interpretation that's causing the problem. And so helping people learn those skills. And, you know, we all need some R&R. We all need to schedule some fun, pleasant, relaxing things. You know, humans need downtime. You know, we need to do pleasant things. And even though we might lack the time or the motivation, if we don't factor them into our day, actually we can start to feel burnt out and fatigued and stressed. So that sort of work-life, you know, balance is important. That ability to pamper yourself every now and again and do something fun and relaxing and enjoyable. Again, it's not self-indulgence. It's basically, you know, good preventative sort of practice. So, and then there's things like mindfulness, which is really, really important. Compassion, gratitude. So there's a bunch of programs that have been created that help package all this stuff up. And I know you're talking about one of these later this week, you know, a program called 5 Ways to Wellbeing. You know, I encourage people to check that out and have a look at, you know, the actions in each of those sort of 5 categories. Another one called Act, Belong, Commit. You know, similar principles, you know, have a look at those. But then, yeah, you know, strangely enough, you know, even if you're not depressed or anxious, if you go onto those websites that have got online programs for people with depression and anxiety, like the Black Dog Institute's got Mood Gym and This Way Up, you can actually use them and learn the techniques, even if you haven't got the condition, and that'll keep you well. So I really encourage people to sort of look out for those sort of online, free, self-help, you know, type of programs, because they actually are proven to work both to prevent as well as to treat depression and anxiety.
It's interesting because to any viewers out there who are tuning in, I listened to one of Steve's webinars at one of my association functions, and I really like the way you described the work you're doing, in that it's really important to have awareness around mental illness and know when to get help. But what you're doing is moving the conversation further upstream. And rather than awareness, which is super important, this is about, yes, we need awareness, but we also could potentially prevent and even get people earlier than when they're really quite sick. So it's about prevention and early intervention, this type of discussion, which again, I come back to the word empowering, because people can take a bit of responsibility for keeping themselves mentally fit.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. And you know, it is their hand in glove. You know, you need both. You know, there are steps that we can take ourselves, as well as I said, the actions we need collectively to take as a community, as a society, to keep ourselves well. But it's also, and it's good if we could talk about this, it's also important to recognise when maybe these conditions are starting to occur, and to not be frightened or ashamed of that, but know what steps to take to deal with that. So it's a conversation about wellness and illness need to happen together. And so, as you say, we're just trying to expand the conversation, because we often talk about what to do when you're not well, and we don't talk enough about what to do to stay well. They're both important. Neither one is, less important or more important than the other.
No, they're all in together, hand in hand. And, prevention around things like heart disease or skin cancer is something we're all really familiar with now and really comfortable with, whereas this is a little bit of a different way to prevent illness, that we're probably not as used to thinking about preventing mental health issues. But that's just a factor of time, I would imagine, with the work you're doing and trying to get this message out there.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it is, it's just the same, depression can be prevented like diabetes can be prevented. That's a little bit more complicated, but it's the same principles apply. So, and it is strange that we've never really talked about prevention of depression and anxiety. We've only ever talked about treatment. Whereas, as you say, Rebecca, we all know how to prevent skin cancer, slip, slop, slap. We all know how to prevent, lung cancer, quit smoking. We all know how to prevent heart attacks and strokes. Keep your blood pressure down, don't smoke, be physically active, eat well. But for depression, people haven't been given that information, and that's partly why we've come into existence, to be able to offer that advice, that information to people. It's not as if we can promise to prevent every case of depression every time, but we're just saying these strategies will reduce the risk, reduce the likelihood. They're worth giving a shot. But you can't also prevent every heart attack or stroke either, but we still try, and we still think that's important.
That's right. And to have a reduction in the current numbers that we've got right now would just be wonderful to see, that just through people doing these steps and taking these measures, and even being aware that there is a way to prevent. It's not a foregone conclusion that anxiety and depression is going to get me because I've got the rest of my family, for example.
Yeah, exactly right. And that's a great point. Family history, okay, that increases the odds, but, genes aren't destiny. Your behavior and the environment around you have a big influence, particularly as children and young adults, but also as adults. This happens, this is important across the lifespan. And so we don't need to be passive and reactive, just wait for it to happen before we do anything. We can be proactive and empowered, as you say. So our message is that, prevention is possible. There are things that we know that we can do now based on the science. We need more research so that we can do things better and better. It's like any area of health or medicine. Start with what you've got, learn more through research, and keep applying it. But I'd love to see, and look, to tell you the truth, we're in this tricky situation where we know that our mental health services are stretched. We hear it every day in the news and in inquiries like the Royal Commission into Mental Health in Victoria and the Productivity Commission inquiry. We know that our services are under the pump. Now, we need to invest in better services, 100%. But, we also need to think about, well, how do we reduce the number of people that experience these conditions in the first place? And that's where prevention comes into the conversation. So, as I said, both together, not either or, not one or the other, but both together are needed. A bigger focus on prevention to reduce the number of people needing help, and an expansion of the mental health services, because they are severely under-resourced at the moment and definitely need more funding.
They were before COVID even hit. So now, we're really at that point where it's critical that prevention is looked at seriously. I wanted to just bring our conversation back a little bit to the perinatal phase, because we know there are certain times in our lives where we're more emotionally and psychologically vulnerable, and the antenatal and postnatal period is certainly a time when parents can experience mental health difficulties. The stats are 1 in 5 parents will experience some sort of mental distress during that phase, or mothers, and 1 in 10 dads. So it's significant. Is there any steps that expectant and new parents can take to prevent developing a mental health condition?
Yeah, there are, and they're very similar, in a sense, to the ones I've already described, more broadly. But I think it's some things are easy to say, hard to do, but they're worth still, giving a shot, I guess. I mean, we know, beforehand, even when you're doing your family planning, I mean, being prepared, this is the right time for you and your partner, to have the child, spacing out of children. So, you're not suddenly dealing with, a lot more pressure with, a lot of kids under a certain age. But, that's ideally, if you can control that, that's great. But, nature is different, and, you don't always have a say over that. But, and then, looking after yourself, you have to be in that great position psychologically. It's a benefit to both you and your developing child, and also to your partner, both partners, and that's where those self-care tips come into it. I think the 2 things that have got the most research evidence are the regular physical activity during pregnancy, but the other things are important, that lifestyle things I've mentioned are also important. And also that sort of, the skills from that cognitive behavior therapy, the sort of the clear thinking, problem solving stuff. But it's also about you and your partner, how you get on, how the relationship's going. We know that, sometimes when baby comes along, it adds, changes things. It changes the relationship, changes the way people relate to each other, can increase financial stress because, one person may not be able to work. So it's about talking it over and sharing that and trying to help each other, support each other. It's all about co-parenting in a way, and being together through that journey and having each other's back and providing that support. And there are going to be times when you feel lousy, and that's okay. It's important to be vulnerable, share that, discuss that, rather than bottle it up, hide it away. If you're not doing well, don't be shy or embarrassed to discuss it with someone. Bring it out into the open, get that support you need. The best thing for your child's physical and mental health and development is your mental health. The getting yourself into that best possible mental health, whatever that's going to look like for you, is really important. So self-care strategies are important, that sort of relationship, building, and then the practicalities of, hopefully there's enough, the financial stress isn't too high. You've got that security, around you, that safety net. Make the most of whatever government entitlements you're, available. The entitlements from your workplace around maternity, paternity leave. Make the most of those things. Connect up with friends and relatives. You're going to need to lean on some people. That's okay, and they want to be there for you, particularly, grandparents, etc., family members, but friends as well. So nurture those relationships. Don't spend all of the time, thinking about the pregnancy and the labour. Connect and stay connected with people around you, because your support network is going to be really important, particularly if, things don't go exactly as the way you'd like them to go. So self-care, relationships, both with your partner and with those around you, are probably what I would emphasize, and just be prepared, try to be flexible. We all have plans and dreams for, our pregnancy, the labour, and it's good to have those, and good to be prepared, and good to have your plan. But you also, may need to adjust. Unexpected things happen, no one's fault. And so having too much investment in having to be this particular way can set you up for disappointment or failure, or a feeling like you fail when you haven't. And so, just go with the flow. The best laid plans don't often work. You can only do your best, and those around you can only do their best. So most times pregnancy will go smoothly, labour will go smoothly, but there's going to be the occasional hiccup, and don't blame yourself or blame others if that happens.
I really like that. I think that I'm a bit of a planner. I like to plan, but the flexibility, you has to, again, go hand in hand. And I think a little analogy that I love that describes this well is, I heard once that astronauts, when they're going to the moon, they're focused on getting to the moon, but there will be course corrections depending on what the environment is. And that flexibility is your course corrections to get you to your end goal. And it takes away the blame of when things don't quite go on the straight line. It's okay to course correct.
That's exactly right. And that's what the psychological term, I guess, resilience is about. That ability to deal with challenge or adversity or, setbacks, but stay relatively on course and balanced. You'll have to make those corrections. You'll feel a bit of disappointment, but look at the big picture. What's the big picture here? It's, a healthy, happy child and a happy, healthy family. And, don't worry about each individual setback. Just keep looking at the future and the big picture. Some things will slip out of your control. A lot of things will stay in your control. Some things will not go so well. Most things will go well. So, that's about, in childhood education, we call that a growth mindset, knowing that, there will be disappointment and failure and we won't be able to do everything right first time. But, that's an opportunity to learn and to grow and improve and do better. So, real flexible thinking, be agile, as we've said all through COVID-19, be prepared to go with the flow, flex. The more, concrete and definite, and it has to be this way and it must be this way, the more you're setting yourself up for disappointment. The higher your standards and it's got to be like this or else I'm not going to be happy, the more you're setting yourself up for disappointment. Do your best, of course, aim for it high, but don't blame yourself or blame others if you don't quite get there. Life's about flexing to challenges.
I think when you talk about the self-care strategies, and sleep's one of them, that can often be one of the biggest blocks to self-care when you've got a young baby. And just hearing what you're saying, that was certainly true for me with my first, particularly. It was really unsettled, colic, and I wasn't sleeping, and my mental health went with that. And I remember having a real narrative around sleep. My baby doesn't sleep, I don't sleep. But maybe if I change that to my baby doesn't sleep very well yet, and putting that word yet on the end of that statement would have made it more fluid and not this set in stone. This is how it is. Oh my God, this is terrible.
Exactly right. And that's the beautiful word yet. It's not happening now, but let's wait and see, give it a bit of time, try a few different things. And of course it's frustrating and it's stressful at the time, but I go back to that point. Looking after yourself is important. What do they say when you're in an aeroplane and they're going through the drill? They say, first put on your oxygen mask and then put on the oxygen mask of your children or those around you. Look after your own mental health and well-being, and that will help you to look after your children's mental health and well-being. Get your partner to help out, it has to be a shared sort of thing. Everyone's circumstances are different, and I know that isn't always possible. And I know that, but there are other people out there. It doesn't have to be family members. It can be health professionals and others that can, give you a helping hand. There are people out there, you're not alone, whatever your personal circumstances. Maternal and child health nurses, midwives, GPs, there's a bunch of health professionals who can help you through your journey, and don't be afraid or embarrassed to call on them and use their assistance.
That's right, and even there's some great, you know, free call services now too, with the Panda Helpline or Gidget Foundation, the Beyond Blue. We are so lucky in Australia to have the services that we do. It's just knowing that they're there and that it's okay to call and use them. We're so blessed. I think sometimes we can forget that there's so much support, and not all of us have our families around. I know I didn't, and that's where you have to go looking and be a bit resourceful to find those connections. Maybe it's your mother's group, maybe it is that person on the end of the Panda Helpline. Yeah, maybe it's a combination of all of them.
That's exactly right. And again, you know, to borrow a very overused but accurate, you know, it takes a village to raise a child. Now, raising starts from, you know, conception, you know, so you need those people around you. And if they're not available because of, you know, geographic distance or, you know, death, and, you know, you don't have people in your life, there are other people there. And you don't have to go it alone. And, you know, I totally agree, Rebecca. There's a lot of great services out there. And don't just use them when you're in crisis. Use them to avoid a crisis. Get in ahead of the curve. Be proactive. Don't wait, and don't think you have to wait until there's a problem before people pay attention or take you seriously. Ask anytime you need it.
Yeah, that's it. Again, they're listed on our handy contacts page, many of those services. So they're there for you if you want to have a bit more of a look to some of them that are available to you. Steve, I'm wanting to go back to something you mentioned earlier around the mental health of our babies and our children being very related to mum and dad's mental health, or mum and partner's mental health. Can you tell us what it is that children need to get off to a good start in life from a mental health perspective?
Yeah, and so I'll just reiterate that number one point. It's about you and your partner being happy and well. You know that'll affect both your pregnancy and the postnatal period. So getting yourself into that good space is you're doing a great thing for your children and not just yourself. But look, you know, I think there are certain basics, and I guess we all know these, but it doesn't hurt to sort of, you know, say them out loud. You know, obviously children, you know, need our love. They need that sort of sense of safety, and they need to be kept safe. And they also need that sort of sense of routine or predictability. And they also need interaction. Kids learn by seeing and modeling, and there's this phrase that's used called serve and return, where, you know, how you interact with a child, they'll then copy, and then you send a signal back to them and they'll send a signal back to you. And it's about trying to understand your child and their personality, because they're all born with a certain temperament or a certain personality. And, you know, that's hard because you've got to adjust, and, you know, but they're not one size fits all, and every child that you raise will require you to behave slightly differently. But they all need that fundamental, you know, cuddling, human contact, interaction, talking, cooing, noise making, playfulness, you know, and that's just sort of that safety and stability. You know, what they don't like, you know, is I guess, you know, anything that's too stressful, and the thing to avoid is, you know, intense or prolonged stress. And that can come from various sources. It can come from conflict or you know, arguments in the home. It can come from a certain level of inconsistency, you know, one thing one day, another thing another day. You know, maybe, you know, not showing enough engagement, and you know, sometimes it's hard, you know, you feel lousy, you just don't have that time and headspace. But, you know, that's why I'm saying you need to look after yourself, because, you know, kids need that interaction. You know, harshness, you know, isn't good, harsh parenting, you know, trying to, you know, yelling and things like that. We all know these things. And of course, and it's sad that it still happens. And this is a thing, right? So, and this is just to a broad audience, and it's not just to parents that I'm saying this. you know, sadly, child abuse and neglect, does occur, and it is one of the major contributors to depression, anxiety, self-harm, suicide in our community. If we could abolish and stop or prevent or eradicate any form of child abuse and neglect, we could actually get rid of 1/4 to 1/2 of all cases of depression in the community. It is such a powerful risk factor. It's like smoking and lung cancer, and so we need to do our best. Parents aren't to blame, for their children's mental health or their future mental health problems. They're not. There's too many other factors that intervene, genes, other environmental factors, experiences during our lifetime. But they can play a role in sort of setting the solid foundations, they haven't got that responsibility, but they can kick things off well. And so, love, safety, predictability, interaction, human contact, these are all important things that create what's called secure attachment, that sense that a child has that, of safety and stability, and that allows them to explore the world as they're growing up as toddlers, knowing that mum or dad or both mums or both dads have got their back. Whereas if it's a more anxious attachment, they're never quite certain, of themselves or what to do. So providing that secure attachment and developing what's called an authoritative, not authoritarian, authoritative parenting style, can set kids up to this great, foundations of good mental health. But, things can still happen, that's no one's fault and certainly not parents' fault. And, some people unfortunately experience other difficulties and traumas that may contribute to mental ill health as they grow older.
And most of which, with time and the appropriate treatment therapy, can be addressed too. So,
I mean, we're in a lucky stage as well that we've got great treatments for people who do experience these conditions. All is not lost. Depression is treatable, anxiety is treatable, eating disorders, psychoses, so, try to prevent, but if you can't, get in early with treatment, because that's the other way to enhance recovery. As you said before, Rebecca, prevention and early intervention really need to be the mottos in mental health. Try to nip it in the bud, but if not, get professional help, get onto effective treatment ASAP, and again, you'll be back in recovery and on with your life.
One thing I'm taking from our conversation is that sometimes you hear mums say, oh, self-care, I don't have time for self-care. I'm looking after my baby. But in actual fact, do the self-care for your baby, because it keeps you well, keeps them well. It's win-win. Exactly right.
I mean, the parents' mental health has an extraordinary impact on children's mental health, and the better that, the more you're at that flourishing high mental well-being, end of the spectrum, the better for you, the better for your partner, the better for your child.
What you've shared with us today has just been such valuable information. Babies or no babies, I think for everyone. It's just been empowering and tremendous help to many people out there who potentially are struggling now with COVID or even before that. So it's just been empowering, because people can do things to achieve better psychological and emotional health. Yeah. And I thank you very much for spending this time with us today, Steve.
Yeah, no problems, Rebecca. And as you said, look, the other take-home message is it's okay to not be okay. And, if you feel that way, again, don't be afraid or embarrassed or ashamed. Reach out, connect with friends, family, or health professionals, mental health professionals. The sooner you get that practical, emotional, and professional support, the sooner you'll be back on track. And, that'll be great for you and for the family. So, that would be my take home. Do what you can, to stay well. Reach out if you're not feeling well. Continue to practice those self-care strategies. They're helpful strategies even when you do experience depression. But doing them every day ahead of time can actually reduce the likelihood or risk.
Yeah, I love that. It's just whether you're well or whether you're not well, just do it, because you won't lose, and you could feel better. Even if there's always another level, isn't there? There's always another level of feeling great and doing well, but there's also empowering things that you can do if you're not feeling so good, and it's okay to not feel that way too. The stat, Steve, that I'm familiar with, and please tell me if I'm wrong, is that over the course of our lifetime, 1 in 2 of us will develop some sort of mental distress or illness. So is that still correct?
Yeah, that's right. So, you know, this should be an everyday conversation. We should be talking about mental health all the time, just like we talk about, you know, heart disease, cancer, whatever. I mean, it's part of life, and we need to know as much as we possibly can, share information, help each other. Look, as I said, as an organisation, we're targeted to people themselves, but also making a difference in the sort of the next level up, you know, the school environment, the work environment, the community environment, and also lobbying governments for change. I mean, you know, our advocacy efforts are around trying to get them to provide more of these programs and services, you know, through maternity services, antenatal services. You don't have to do everything on your own. There are steps you can take. We've got a responsibility, we feel, as an organisation, to do things on your behalf, you know, at that broader community and societal level.
Well, I'm going to, if you're okay with me doing this, Steve, is also put the Prevention United details on our Handy Contacts page, so people can pop on there and check your website out and all the great work that you're doing, because it is great work. And I just want to thank you again so much for joining me today, and to those of you who listened in on this discussion for what is Perinatal Mental Health Week 220. This is the first of our chats with experts and friends, and over the week from 12 noon every weekday this week, we'll be having different discussions with some different fantastic guests. Tomorrow I'll be chatting to my friend, a psychologist, and also a panda community champion about her lived experience of perinatal anxiety and depression, and also how she recovered from that. So I hope you can join that discussion tomorrow. And I just want to say thanks again, Steve. Take care of you, and to anyone who's listening, take care of yourselves. And I just want to say have a good day as well. So thanks so much. Thanks, Steve. We'll talk again soon.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye.